All right, on the second page of the homework for Target 1, Unit 13, this is page 381. So state which theorem you can use to show that the quadrilateral is a parallelogram. So number 3, we have that opposite angles are congruent. Okay, so I'll fix my colors here. The two 100-degree angles are congruent, and we have red congruent marks in the other two. So opposite angles are congruent. For number 4, we have opposite sides are congruent. Both pairs of opposite sides are congruent. On number 5 and number 8, we have diagonals bisect each other. The diagonals bisect each other. That's enough information to show that the parallelograms are congruent. On number 6, I can also show opposite angles are congruent. And I could show that consecutive angles are supplementary, which isn't one of your properties as it's written, but it does go with the definition, which is one of your properties. One of the ways we can prove that a shape is a parallelogram is to show that the opposite sides are parallel. Well, because of this information that I just put inside the green box, the 112 degrees and the 68 degrees, I could show that those two angles are consecutive interior angles of lines, and those consecutive interior angles are supplementary, which means that I have parallel lines on the left and the right. I could also take a box down the side and say that 68 and 112 on the side, there are consecutive interior angles and they are supplementary. That makes the top and bottom parallel. So I could use the fact that I have two sets of parallel sides as well as the opposite angles. And then number 7 is the only property that kind of stands by itself that wasn't an original property of a parallelogram, but it is a way to prove, is I can show that if one pair of opposite sides is both congruent and parallel, I have enough information. Now trying to memorize the different ways to show parallelograms or shapes are parallelograms can be confusing. Anything in the original 5 properties does work as a converse, but ultimately this comes down to whether or not you could show the shape as a parallelogram. And I can show shapes or parallelograms a couple ways. I already showed you one. That is, if I get enough information to show that consecutive interior angles are supplementary, that gives me parallel lines. Or if I had alternate interior angles, I could do that. Another way that I could show something as a parallelogram is to show congruent triangles. If you can take a quadrilateral, split it into 2 congruent triangles by drawing a diagonal, you're always going to have enough information to show that the lines are parallel. For example, on this one with number 7, I have the opposite sides 9 are congruent. The side I just drew as a diagonal, as a triangle side, is congruent to itself with the reflexive property. And then because of the parallel lines, I also have alternate interior angles. That means these two triangles are congruent using side angle side. And once the triangles are congruent, you can show other things. You can show that corresponding angles are congruent. If those two angles that I just marked in orange are congruent, that means I have another set of parallel sides, and so I have 2 sets of parallel sides. The same thing with number 5 and 8, you have diagonals bisect each other. Because the diagonals bisect each other, and using maybe vertical angles, like on number 5, you have side angle side. You have these 2 triangles are congruent to each other, the triangle on the top and the triangle on the bottom. So this angle on the top left and this angle on the bottom right are going to be congruent to each other using corresponding parts of congruent triangles, or the definition of congruent triangles. And so then I have parallel sides, and I can do that over and over to show that all of the sides are parallel. So when you're trying to prove a quadrilateral or show a quadrilateral is a parallelogram, you can use your 5 properties that you learned before and use the converse of those. You also have this additional one for number 7 that was not brought up originally, and you can remember the main idea. The main idea is to show that they are parallel sides, and you can do that if you can show congruent triangles or other things.